It's a CO. Really, what? Where's CO? So CO.
What do you mean?
Let me just check it. Draw. So OG is W equal MC squared. O is Cambridge Swift. CG is Feta Zubrowka. And CO is Brown and down to clown. I think that might be.
What?
That's your.
Oh,
I think you're
very wrong.
Fine, don't worry. Promise to have fun, right? That's fine. You can add that too. Are you all okay with being streamed?
Yeah. Or like research.
This one, the audio better be working.
Yeah.
Not like last year.
Just you guys are fine. Please. Hi everyone. My name is Sachin. I've been the chair for the frown. Chatting with me is just over. Cute. Awesome. You all have a timekeeper by any chance? Do you want to like keep time and clap? Yeah, you can do it. Awesome. So give me 1 second to take the ballot out, and then we can start the introductions where you can use your name, what position, and if you want, your preferred pronoun starting from G. Maurice, yeah, you right.
Maraia Chissa74.0.
Anoushka speaking fast, student, please. Emma speaking second, she, her, please.
CG.
Sorry, Mikołaj first, he can please.
Michaela second, she.
DLO.
Max speak. Aryan speaking first. He him pronouns, and then Nav me speaking second. Also he him pronouns, please.
Room's here.
Okay. Is it okay if we start without him, or how
I actually don't know. I think he said he.
So we'll give him a minute, and if he doesn't,
I'll read him first. Yeah.
and we will start.
Where you at? Where you at? Okay. Okay, cool. No, it's at the end of the opposite hallway to the bathroom. Go away.
I won't touch by any chance.
I'm
I have a table.
already shot my own. You get more for now. I'm looking very nice. Excellent. Doing this, I'm gonna have to exchange.
That's fine. That's fine. Now.
There's a
Let me give the judges some stuff to get some brownie points.
Guys, I'm with his team.
Okay. I don't see color.
MO.
We're gonna start, but Mac can join us, yeah? Okay, PM, when we're ready.
What's the phrasing of the motion again?
I just said.
He regrets creating the invasion of 2026.
Things first. What is this debate not about? It's not okay for opposition to come up and talk to us about Russians needing to somehow invade Ukraine at some point in time because it geopolitically makes sense for them to do it. What they have to do is defend the specific manner in which the invasion in 2022 happened, the specific timing of that invasion and that war, and all the specifics attached to this case. It's not okay to say, oh, NATO was playing in your backyard. You have to do something about it. They have to do it in a specific way that it happened. They have to defend this. What is this debate about? It's specifically about defining Putin's interests. I think fundamentally we do that in OG by being very simple. Putin's interest most of the time is the consolidation of power within Russian politics. This is by definition the only thing that matters to him because everything else extrapolates from that. It has to do with, for example, flexing the muscles of Russia requires him to keep the power within Russia towards him. It requires, for example, the opposition to be weak. It requires the oligarchs, who he's very reliant on, to be on his side. What we are going to claim from opening government today is that this is significantly less likely in the light of the 2022 invasion in Ukraine, the specific way in which it happened. We're going to do this in two ways from opening government. First, we're going to talk to you about the impact and consolidation of power. We're going to have A, B, C, D, E, F. mechanisms on how this specifically happens and why it meant that the consolidation of power became significantly more difficult and the impacts of that in regards to desperation and skepticism. And then secondly, we're going to talk to you about the future, i.e. perhaps maybe, I don't know, this is maybe too meta, but the present right now for us when it comes to Putin's campaign and the impact it had on his agenda. Before that, let's be very clear about what the comparative in this round is. We don't have to attach ourselves to a very, very specific one. We can just simply say that number one, we would be significantly more okay with things such as leveraging the new oil channels, which gave significant reliance of the EU and generally Europe on Russia for their exports and their imports of oil. It also meant that perhaps you could spend the resources that you spent on the war on things such as protecting yourself a bit more meaningfully against NATO in case Ukraine ended up becoming a member of it, which is by definition something which means that part of the comparative can also be things such as leveraging international law post-1945 about the sphere of influence of different countries and power in general in a way that benefited Russia, in a way that protected them against the potential membership of Ukraine within NATO. Are there any clarifications? Yes. Impact on consolidation of power. The first thing to note is that when it comes to oligarchs, the way that what's it called? The place where they all go together starts with a K, maybe, not Crimea, the other one. Yeah, the way the Kremlin functions in general is that we have large reliance when it comes to oligarchs. It happens in a variety of ways. It can happen through just having the financial support of these individuals because you guarantee the value of their assets because we're talking about mad billionaires over there. We're talking about people such as, I don't know, Abramovich, right? That's the one example that comes to mind. And the one I'll be using when it comes to saying how smart sanctions screwed over these individuals. The point at which, for example, their assets were frozen, the point at which they have no ability to use their money, the point at which they have no ability to function and operate businesses in other countries in Europe, much like in the case of Abramovich, who had to sell, for example, Chelsea and his shares in Chelsea in order to basically be able to function, in order to basically abide by the sanctions and not get screwed over. What that means then is that when you have a lot of Abramoviches around the world, and Russian people are very rich, and the point at which you have your assets frozen is the point at which you're less likely to support Putin, the point at which you're unable to function and do the business that you would normally do. What that means is that you generally draw support back from the specific individual, and perhaps you look at alternatives. These alternatives exist, and I'm using past tense because as of last week, they did, but now they don't because they died, because oppositions did exist. Navalny was a very legitimate opposition where effectively oligarchs started jumping ships, perhaps by not explicitly, but at the same time being okay with the opposition. Because, for example, they looked at him as an alternative that perhaps is not as vilified by the West to the extent that Putin was, which is, by the way, mechanism number 3, which is the fact that you have vilification, a far more explicit fight between the West and Putin, the point at which the West feels the obligation and has perhaps the legal capacity to join the war and basically try and fund, for example, Ukraine in order to fight back against Russia because they thought that this was an illegitimate invasion. The point at which that happens, that's when you have a significantly more tension between the West and Russia. What that means then, and that's comparative, right? It will probably exist under either side of the house. But the way that it happened very explicitly meant that there's no way that you're going to have as much of trading, as much of a cooperation between the two in a way that benefits either one, which has to do also with things such as oil and the fact that, yeah, okay, the retaliation of Putin was to take back oil and basically say, we're not trading with you guys. But that meant that you, number one, fucked up the entire oil market. But number two, it meant that perhaps you would have harms to the economy and the ruble as it did happen. Yes, okay, now it's turned back to normal. But at the time, the instability that was attached to the Russian economy, the fact that we had such spikes between the ruble and, for example, euro or the dollar meant that you had issues, I'll say it this way, in regards to people and their access to capital within Russia, which then meant that you have all those trickle-down harms to the Russian people themselves, right? Which you may or may not care about and may not care about as Putin, but at the same time, when you have a bunch of them who are suddenly feeling this instability, because note, you did have corruption and all of these things do exist, but the model still remains one of performative legitimacy, i.e. as long as you provide me with stability, I'll probably not go on and have an uprising against you, or I won't go out on the streets, or I won't, for example, use every opportunity I ever get in order to get in an opposition, because currently an opposition does exist. As a result, you get domestic instability in politics as well. So from all those sources, we see that Putin is weakened. What does that then mean practically? Before I go into that closing, do you have a POI?
Do you think Putin liked every single one of his oligarchs, and why were there so many windows near them?
Sorry?
Do you think Putin liked every single one of his oligarchs, and why were there so many windows near them?
I don't know, you'll have to ask Putin. I'm not gonna tell you about his relationships with oligarchs, but I will say that whether or not you like all of your oligarchs or some of them, this affected all of them. The mechanism I gave you is universal. It doesn't apply to specific people, whether or not they were near windows and as a result they were killed, or for example, whether or not they were in an airplane that perhaps went down. All that opposition that at the time existed, including the individual whose name I can't remember, who owned the company with the mercenaries, are all things that created skepticism. And the reason why is because the point at which you start killing people is when desperation sows. And when you're desperate, you can't flex muscles anymore, because haven't seen anyone being particularly intimidating, the point at which they flex their muscles and at the same time they're crying because it's a cry out for help, the point at which you go through a process of trying to kill your opposition, where for example you have increased skepticism about whether or not you're going to be scared of Russia anymore, because they thought that this was an open and shut case where they intervene and then suddenly, for example, they get rid of Ukraine as a problem. But this is no longer the case, because now you have all this skepticism about whether or not the Russian army is even effective in the first place, and whether or not all those resources that they spent were even worth it, and whether or not now they could be used in other ways. All those reasons. Proud to be OG.
I thank Steve for that speech. Now I call on the leader of opposition, stage.
Thank you.
The stream is running, so.
What?
The stream is running.
No, I was trying to move the mouse out of the way. Great. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. 3, 2, 1, go. How 3 main points for you today. Why Putin does not regret this happens. Putin does not regret Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Firstly, how it's making ground, still making impact like territorially in Ukraine. Secondly, how it's benefiting his international interests, and thirdly, how it's benefiting his domestic interests. But first, some rebuttal and some characterization of what Putin's incentives are. We agree in some aspects with the proposition. We think that consolidating his power is one of Putin's main incentives. We think that he can go about this, and the ways that he's gone about this through the invasion of Ukraine in particular. Number one, so draining of Western resources, influence, and perception. Right? Russia looks like, Putin and Russia look like a stronger actor when the West's influence and the West's perception internationally is diminished. Secondly, when West is just pouring money and losing money, that's good for Putin, because it means that one, they can't provide effective opposition against him. Two, it means there's domestic turbulence and chaos, etc. I'm going to go on to expand about this. Second one is expanding his sphere of influence. We already had from the opening government ideas about fears that they had about Ukraine joining NATO, etc. But also saying territorially, more land means more areas for him to exert his influence, etc. So these are his priorities. We don't really but a lot of rates of life in Ukraine, all of this kind of stuff, whilst important, does not feature in his priorities. Right? So some rebuttal. We got some stuff from OG about opposition in Russia and how this built up lots of opposition and the oligarchs were frustrated with it. And two things on that. Number one, whilst there was some protests happening after soon after the war, A, it's mostly gone down. B, it was repressed quite thoroughly. The protests, whilst they existed, never really resulted in never galvanized in mass collective action or anything. It just kind of stayed to low-level opposition. C, yes, Navalny was very much a critic and a vocal opponent, but he's been in prison for years. Every time someone has taken active measures, they have been repressed and put away. We don't think that or has been a significant threat against what he's doing. Also, from the idea of the West joining, which I'm going to actually move on to my next point on. Firstly, his territorial interest in Ukraine, right? Putin is still making ground, just in recent weeks, he's gained major cities, they're still making impact there. He's taking, this is one of his major interests, as we kind of spelled out. One, he's gaining more land. Two, he's kind of continuing to diminish and chip away Ukraine's authority on the global stage, the land they have, the power they control, right? Two, in taking this land along with the horrible loss of life that comes with it, he's reducing spirits in Ukraine. The war has now been going on for 2 years. There are many, and whilst there are still some who continue to fight the cause, there's high levels of discontent locally. Death toll is extremely high, and proportionally the death toll has a much greater impact on Ukraine than it does on Russia, simply because of
Question.
Yeah.
How much of a success would you consider that he's currently gaining some ground 2 years after he started this conflict?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to kind of move on to that, but it means that he's able to continuing to gain ground, like he's not being defeated, and I'm going to kind of move on to say kind of undermines the West and that accent statement, but also like he's not losing because it's like loss of life is so disproportionate in Ukraine for the Russian army, or at least considering his interest, he's not particularly concerned about the loss of life or like the way it's affecting the people. So number two kind of links on to like my rebuttal to you and one of our main points, which is the way that it kind of impacts the West and affects the West. One of the best things for Putin is the fact that the West has poured money and resources and time into this war. One, it means that like the West is not able to defeat him and that they haven't really, like despite the fact that multiple countries have put troops and efforts into Ukraine, they haven't really been able to beat him, and he's still managing to gain ground despite that. The West is not as powerful as like it may think it is, or it's like he wants people to think it's like not that powerful, it's not able to win, and often raises questions about like to what extent the West's military at the moment is fit for purpose and whether it's functioning as it should, makes them look weak internationally. Two, like it's a financial drain on the West. Not only are they spending this money, but because we currently have a cost of living crisis in this country and many others, inflation is high, and because of the oil prices that were impacted by his actions following this, domestically in the West, there's a lot of like economic turbulence, frustration, anger, and constant questions about like the spending in Ukraine, as well as the additional like burden of taking on Ukrainian refugees, comes with more that they'll come all about taking in more people, etc. What he's achieved through this is he's managed to essentially A, undermine Western influence, but B, also just increase like Western turbulence, whilst also like managing to like damage the economy to a significant extent, because it's not sustainable for the West to keep on pouring money into this whilst he continues to slowly make ground. Also, at the moment, with the crisis in Gaza, global attention is away from him. He's not even getting that much criticism from the West anymore because people have diverted their attention greatly, and the money that was like being funneled into Ukraine, whilst money is still going, money is kind of being split, causes, attention, headlines are being split. He is essentially getting away with what he's doing without the kind of global pressure and the protests in the same way that followed the immediate aftermath of the invasion. And all sort of action from the West is being undermined because, conferences like Munich are failing, because despite attempts at negotiations or attempts at stopping the Russian or damaging the Russian troops to such an extent that they leave or stop is impossible. Third is one is the domestic impact, so I already spoke about in my rebuttal. But firstly, whilst there has been some backlash, it has not resulted in significant protest, so it hasn't really destabilized his control sufficiently. And some oligarch backlash, he's dealt with most of it. It's not like he's still in power, he's managed to consolidate his power and essentially got rid of a lot of opposition. Two, it also means that the money can be spent on the way he wants to. He can divert money away from welfare, the spending budget on army, and filter out military resources, because it's interest that it makes the country look strong. It does make the country strong if they have a strong military. Three, it also means at least for a while, was made it much harder to effectively criticize the government because the government kind of became linked together and became anti-patriotic to there was conflict going on, it was disruptive, anti-patriotic to kind of take part in protests. For all of these reasons, I urge you to request submission.
I thank you for the speech. Now I call on the Deputy Prime Minister to say this. Yeah, no worries.
Ready?
Putin regrets the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 because the war didn't really go out as he planned it or as he predicted it. Firstly, Zelensky and the response from Ukraine, that was very different.
Putin didn't expect the Ukrainians to last so long because generally the politicians in Eastern Europe throughout the times, Putin was able to have a lot of influence over them. But this didn't happen in Ukraine. So this was very different and unpredictable for Putin himself, right? This was something that because the invasion of Ukraine was rushed, one day we woke up and we found out that there had been shots fired across the border, right? That's how the war started. It was very quick and unpredictable. We think that Putin didn't really have the time to think it through and see how Zelensky and Ukraine would respond to it. It was very different than what we have all been used to since, as Maurice told you, the 1945 post-war world order, right? Secondly, what we told you was very different for Putin was the response from the West. Yes, you can have opposition telling you that there has been a lot of political, people not really agreeing with the support going to Ukraine for the money spent for the, for the refugees taken in the country. That is very normal, right? Although no one has backed out from the support in Ukraine. What people are saying, what analysts are saying, is that the support that the West has had for Ukraine is the rebirthing of NATO. It has been something extremely well organized and very and the cooperation between the members of NATO was so great that it was never seen before. It was the first time that we have seen NATO in action in such a way, in such a united way, where all countries from the West upheld the sanctions, right? Where even Hungary, for example, had some sanctions which generally do not agree with the countries of the West, right? It was a time where the West came on Russia extremely united, and yes, obviously you can have opposition talk to us about maybe some political opposition, maybe people disliking these facts, but comparing the actual support that the West sent out to Ukraine and has been sending for 2 years, retreating that support is extremely important, and Putin could not have predicted that because it had never happened before for NATO and for the West as a whole, right? So these are two things that were unpredicted for Putin. And thirdly, it's how long Ukraine lasted, right? So this was a war that wasn't really that much prepared, right? The way that Russia advanced into Ukraine, it wasn't like a classic war happening as we could have potentially thought. And it wasn't an attack as if an attack was made to Ukraine from Russia, as what happened with, for example, Hamas and Israel, right? It wasn't like that. He prepared the attack himself, and Putin, and it wasn't really well executed, right? The way that they went into Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence, with the help from the West, were able at a critical point during the war to turn over the war for Russia, right? What happened with Elon Musk's satellite and the intelligence that Ukraine was getting about the war efforts from Russia could really have tipped over the war, although Musk didn't want to get involved. But you know what? That's not a point for opposition to make because that's completely reliant on a third party who didn't want to get involved himself, right? What we show you is that the war could have tipped over for Russia, not in the way that it was expecting, but the way that it invaded Ukraine in 2022, right? Now, they have this case about Putin caring a lot about the West being weaker. Okay, Nadia.
Do you really think that Putin didn't know that he only had 4 functional Su-57 fighters and that the rest of his fighter fleet really wasn't up to snuff?
Okay, yeah, maybe he knew, but I don't think that he knew that Ukraine would have been able to have lasted so long. That's what I'm saying. Even if he knew his manpower, the reason why he brought into that war was exactly because he thought that he could win this easily, and he didn't. That's what I'm saying. That's why it's so important that Russia and Putin rushed into the war, because they thought that it would be an easy war to win, because that's what President told for him. It was unprecedented for Russia to not win over an Eastern European country over which they had influence on, right? So what I'm telling you is that Putin did not expect, and that's why he's now regretting it 2 years after. Now, about the West being weaker. Yes, we agree, Putin does care about the West being weaker, but it doesn't care that much about that, like to happen to the expense of his own strength. What this means is that if the West being weaker means that Russia is also weaker and much weaker, because as Maurice told you in his speech, Russia is now very reliant on China, for example, which obviously for a leader like Putin, he doesn't really like being under the influence of someone like China, even if they're allies, because interests are not completely aligned, right? So he would have preferred for him to stay strong as he was before the war. He has lost his influence exactly because, as Maurice told you, uniquely, he lost the support of the West by doing a war. While the alternatives that he would have had at hand would have given him a much better advantage and not forced him to go under the influence of China completely. He could have been more independent, and that's what we tell you that autocratic leaders want the most. Autocratic leaders like Putin like their independence and like making their own decisions for their country. So yes, Putin wants the West weaker, but not at the cost of his own country, of his own economy, with support from the people, right? You have and the West is weaker, but also, as I told you before, the West is really united, and the West is not backing off. The West is continuing with the sanctions, and the West is finding alternatives to oil, which they wouldn't have done otherwise, probably, if it wasn't for the war that made them that gave them no other option but to stop having cooperation, any sort of economic cooperation with Russia because it is a war. That is what we're regretting. Now, thirdly here, they tell us that people are dying and Putin doesn't care. We tell you that he does care. Why? Because even if the war ends or it continues and he's advancing and it's good for him, the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia do not support him at this point because he has killed families, because he has invaded homes, right? Because he has gone wrong, because the war does not go as is expected. We don't think that Putin wanted to go into the murders of Ukrainians, into the homes of Ukrainians and start murdering them. These are rushed actions which Putin did not want to do, and therefore he's regretting it because he's losing the support of the people, some people in Ukraine who would have been okay with having cooperation with Russia and his own people. And what that will lead to is that after the war has ended, or even during the war, he might lose the support of his own voters, of the people in his country, of the oligarchs, and might be overturned. Notice that that's what they're also saying about Netanyahu in Israel. After the war is over, he's probably going to be overturned because the people don't want him. That's why I'm waiting.
Thanks, speakers, for that speech. Now I call on the deputy opposition to close out. Yeah.
Putin doesn't care about voters and he has fraudulent elections. Putin doesn't care about oligarchs and somehow they end up dead. Putin cares about his position domestically to an extent that also applies internationally. Cares about weakening the West, consolidating power and spreading his influence. Because of what he is achieving on the South Pole, obviously he does not regret it. Two things in this speech. First, looking at domestic interests, engaging the proposition case, and secondly, looking at international interests. The first one is engaging domestic. Because we get a strange case outside proposition that basically goes along the lines of oligarchs are being really unhappy because they lost some money after sanction and therefore going to support Navalny if he was alive, but maybe someone else. 5 responses here. Firstly, their support of Navalny is never going to happen, given he's on an anti-corruption campaign and exactly against the oligarchs. Potentially a Wagner group in a better comparison, but they again are able operation currently because of Putin. Neither option is going to happen. Secondly, we think there very much is a perception among Russian oligarchs, particularly because this is what Putin is presenting, is that Russia is likely to win, right? Therefore, they probably do not care about the short-term losses because them 2 years further, they're in a much better economic position than they previously have been. I think that's something really important to measure, because I think they just view this from like day one. That is to say, we're looking at this as though it's like 2 months into the conflict, and therefore they're economically really struggling, whereas we're 2 years into the conflict when Putin is making this decision. They're not economic to the extent they were. It has consolidated quite significantly. I think that's kind of important in harmonization. Keep in mind there, but it's not all just throughout your case here. And assuming this has just happened and this is a decision we are making. Fourthly, we think oligarchs have supported Russia, but quite specifically Putin, when he campaigned on an anti-Western stance. I'm very surprised that oligarchs are going to be like, his anti-Western stance, oh, he's definitely not going to get into conflict with the West, but anything's going to happen with me. Probably not likely. They probably got into the ship and ride into it. But effectively, to the extent that they do want to like move away from them, they have no option, right? They do fall out of windows. They often get another shock and get poisoned. They do have like weird plane crashes that just so happen to coincide. it was like we just don't think it's a possible option. That's never going to happen, right? So this idea with the domestic consolidation probably isn't at risk. The kind of person that we tell you on our side is going to be very little backlash to it. Because he controls the media, controls the perception in Russia, but also because there's much more going on in the world right now. It's not just the Ukraine war, but there's also a war going on in Gaza, Palestine and Israel, right? We have a lot more consuming media on Western Texas, we use very little domestic backlash internally, but also it also meant that he had the capacity to divert money towards the military, which has been his interest from the beginning. People wanted to cooperate, put money more into the military and pick that up. This is literally too much to do that. What we got told inside competition, and the last response there, is that people in Russia don't like him. Fundamentally, even if they don't, I don't think Putin cares. He is democratically elected, right? And literally the person trying to against him ends up in prison and is now being killed. I don't think it's a priority and it's been irrelevant in this debate. Before we go on to second, yeah, I'll take from closing first. Go.
Okay, you've told us that Putin doesn't care about oligarchs. You've told us that Putin doesn't care about their families. You've told us he doesn't care about support domestically. What the fuck does he care about?
We can quite good that he does care about sport domestically, but it doesn't rely on oligarchs. He also relies on his perception in terms of international. Doesn't mean the West entirely has been international perception, right? It has been, are the West weakened? Is he stronger in terms of territorial gains? For instance, that case that we brought to you on our side. Let's look at international interest. What do we tell you? Firstly, on you, the fact that they're making massive gains in Ukraine. Literally, the other weekend just taken a territory which Ukraine had to flee from because they were doing so badly. They had been quite significant now. They were reducing the skirt considerably and the massive debt. So got a POI that's saying, well, it doesn't look strong now because they're 2 years into it. I think fundamentally having people around it and just neglect or try to counter what's been going on. The second I like the flag here, and it has a huge impact, particularly in terms of the West here. Massive cost of living prices in terms of oil prices that have huge impact that buys into our idea and his interest. Secondly, the international interest in terms of the West wasting resources. Between the West have fundamentally huge sums of money putting into Ukraine, when Ukraine have actually made very little progress forward. They have increased oil prices to an unreasonable extent and caused cost of living prices for many millions of people around the world. Thirdly, political chaos in the US, where instead of debating whether or not to give money to Ukraine or not, literally disrupting the political processes in the West, exactly what Putin wanted to do from the very beginning. Fourthly, said because of gas in particular and disruption in terms of media attention and diversion of money, which buys into his idea of getting progress forward. And lastly, in terms of reputation, the West looks so weak. They can't do anything except send some money. They can't even agree on anything in the media conference. They're coming together to disagree even on how much money to send. They look incredibly weak that they can't go against one country here. What do we get from side proposition? They say, yes, we care about internationally, but we don't really care that much. We care more about domestically. I think there's a problem with side proposition here. This is what the DPM says. And what I'm going to tell you here, quite crucially, Putin ran on a campaign to be anti-Western, be anti-capitalist. Therefore, going against the West, weakening the West, and he can have campaign slogans, type of other media that fundamentally says, look how weak the West are, look at their struggling because they don't have our oil, they don't have our support. So this buys into entirely his campaign, making him unlikely to ever go against them, or unlikely to challenge them. Right? And secondly, the next person says like, oh, it looks bad because they're like China, right? We just don't think that probably does, right? In the sense that if Russia and China coming together make an anti-Western bloc, right? This probably buys more into our campaign. And they're like, look at the support we have for our idea. Look at the support I have. I can create mass opportunities. Look at the economic opportunity he can get, the military opportunity he can get with China. This directly buys into it. I want to do a negative thing, it was insertion. The last thing about the video is that the West are united. I just think this is fundamentally true. See the Trump quote that recently happened about how the NATO country had to spend 3%, and it's almost inviting Russia's invasion. The West are united because they're disagreeing with each other all the time. But secondly, we fundamentally realize they're weak. There's been huge media reports recently about the fact that actually they don't have military that can get so many people out of the military, the money and way and the resources, there's been countless failed testing of missiles, etc. They look weak. They may be united in your best case, but they aren't in a capacity to beat Russia, and that becomes entirely apart in recent days. Lastly, they say, Todd, and we get this idea that because basically they should regret it, he regrets it because war hadn't gone as he planned. I think that's just not true. We can make careless analysis of what had likely to happen. But under our side of the house, we think fundamentally Putin's objective here was to claim more territory to project his interests in terms of the government interest and to weaken the West and West perception. He's fundamentally been able to do this under this debate so far, and clearly this is something he's wanted and interested to do. We quite clearly proved to you across all the meta aspects of his possession, fundamentally how you care about Western perception and how Biden's domestically and his consolidation of power. So for all these reasons, I'm entirely tired to step forward.
The time to speak for their speech and all the speakers in top half of their speeches. Now I call upon people of government to say their key statements.
Already. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Everything openly government is perfectly fine. So the one distinction and how I'm going to explain how it's going. Everything they say, they're tying it back to Putin, like Putin's personal ego about domestic politics. What we're going to do here, what is debate is for the international actually matters. First, they explained to an extent about NATO and the European Union. I'm going to go further. So the one thing that Putin wanted to avoid altogether, like since he came to power, is to Eastern states being more Western, or like expansion of EU and NATO, anything that considers Western influence towards Ukraine, towards Georgia, towards everyone. He absolutely failed that at every single extent. Why is that the case? They explain that NATO is over. They don't explain how. I'm going to explain to you how also, like, what Putin basically did with the invasion is basically create stronger and possibly bigger European Union. Why? First, he managed to do something amazing, which is to convince historically neutral Finland and Sweden to join NATO. Fucking unprecedented thing. It's actually quite amazing how to manage that. Secondly, countries like Kosovo, Northern Macedonia, Albania, countries that already were potential futuristic members of the European Union. Now, there is a double incentive, firstly, from those countries to go towards the EU because they want protection and because they want integration, and from the EU towards those countries so that nothing like that happens. It's specifically important because Western Balkans specifically already have some pro-Russian sentiment. Like, but okay, with an exception of Serbia, that's already pro-Russian. Countries like Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, stuff like that, already have an incentive to be somewhat pro-Russian because of anti-NATO, anti-EU sentiments. Now they don't have that because they see that alternative of the Union is not better. So why does Putin care about NATO so much? Because like that was his main goal, to stop NATO. It was Putin versus NATO. And what he did, single-handedly, but that invasion 2 years ago, was to basically say, hi NATO, you now have a massive incentive to basically go into those countries and basically contradict what I've been trying to do since 2004. Second case, he massively strengthened Ukraine. So the thing is, as of the essay that he wrote and the motivation behind all the factors, he never believed Ukraine should have been an independent country. By what he did is insanely strengthened it. Like firstly, as already mentioned, it received amazing international help. And it's once again, even though there are some tensions in the West about Ukraine, still it received nearly unilateral help. Like the Ukrainians are like welcoming most of European countries, although there are some protests, and we're not considering that 100 people in the European Union like them. There is still more support than it was before. But what's more important, and the most important thing is the fact that they don't touch the button. Putin basically destroyed his entire political plan. Because what was Putin's political plan? To basically influence politics of neighboring countries through soft power, non-official ways. I'm not going to take you away. So since 2004, since the orange revolution in Ukraine, the war in Georgia, Crimea, Belarus, like pro-Russia parties within the European Union. That was his game. That was always his goal, right? He failed because, like, nothing kind of happened after 2004. Nothing happened after the invasion of Georgia. Nothing happened in Crimea. But now he made it. He just went too far. He just went too far to the extent that now every single person is gonna look, oh, that company is from Russia. I'm not gonna work with them, even though that company may be completely fine. That party is right wing and kinda says that we shouldn't take sides in Russia-Ukraine war. Now they're gonna look at them, and those parties already have that influence. The biggest pro-Russian party in Poland went from 18% to 6% in just 4 years. They lost triple of their MPs just single-handedly because now something considered to be pro-Russian is a fucking embarrassment, and nobody wants to do anything with Russia. So what he lost is his soft power. Why is that specifically important? Because there are 3 scenarios as to how this war may end up. Firstly, Ukraine wins. It's an embarrassment for it. It's an absolute embarrassment, and I think there's no excuse. Like, I don't think there is coming back from politically, socially, economically, right? Second one, there is a peace treaty that I don't know, bilateral agreement, whatever. or also an embarrassment for him because everybody, as of DPM explained, everybody was expecting Putin to win. And at the point he doesn't achieve that specific goal of winning, he already lost like the single biggest fucking army in the world. The great country of Russia that's so organized, and Putin is like a very strong leader. It fucking collapses immediately. And third thing, what if he wins? Because that's most important. He may get his short-term goal. He may get his short-term goal of yes, taking half of Ukraine. I don't know actually what's going on, but let's say half of Ukraine, right? His short-term goal of like scratching Ukraine in half worked. However, that's about it. Because at the point where he won the war, NATO and the EU are gonna be like, okay, we're gonna send 70 million troops to the eastern border of the European Union and make sure that that never happens again. We're gonna send even more troops to Georgia. We're gonna send even more troops to Kazakhstan. We're gonna make sure that countries like Baltics, like the border with Finland, European Union, Budapest, Hungary, we're gonna make sure that pro-Russian parties do not have any more influence. We're gonna make sure that not a single Russian influence in the West is ever going to be of any matter ever again. And before that opening.
NATO physically refused to go to war with Russia, hence why they don't send troops. Why is this going to happen?
Yes, NATO refused. Of course, that's important because if NATO invaded, Russia would have the right to invade Poland. Russia would have the right to invade any NATO member. Specifically, it's important because Ukraine isn't a NATO member yet. I know this is kind of speculative, but if let's say Putin invaded Poland, who is a NATO member, all of NATO would invade Russia. At the point where Ukraine isn't. Like NATO cannot invade because NATO is specifically you have to be a NATO member or not a NATO member to invade or be invaded. That's specifically important. Sorry for speculating, that's actually how it works. Thirdly, he made look Russia like a fucking joke. And I know this kind of goes towards what Odi was saying, but I think it goes a bit further. Because firstly, Russian military looks like a fucking joke right now. At the point where we have Prigozhin and the Wagner group basically going against him and basically saying, hi, yeah, so we're soldiers, we're fighting right now, we have no ammo, we have no tanks, we have no guns, Putin basically duped us, we feel left alone. This entire image of strong Russia, provided that they win in the best case scenario, is still embarrassing. Because like everybody expects you to win in an absolutely crushing manner. At the point where you win, as I explained, you don't get any of the benefits you wanted, you still look embarrassing. So yeah, to conclude. We take it over, although they did brilliant, they don't expect the international, which we think matters much more, because at the point where you didn't care about the domestic stuff, the consequences of the international stuff that I explain to you are much more broader. So what we explain is how we actually strengthen NATO and the European Union to the extent that it's actually unprecedented how he strengthened Ukraine specifically, and that he doesn't even believe Ukraine is a country, so that's kind of much. So he made Russia look like a fucking joke. So in conclusion, the only thing that Putin did with invading Ukraine is to make sure that his political plan of influencing other countries and his persona will never be respected and treated seriously again for the government.
Is there any chance I could run to the washroom? Sorry. Thank you. I've left my phone.
Thanks for that speech. Now I call on the opposition to take the case in a minute and have come. Thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Oops.
all we have to prove today, and something that all sides seem to agree on, is that Putin's ultimate interest is not whether Russia is good or not, is not whether the West thinks Russia is good or not, but is rather how long and how hard he can control the Russian people and the Russian country until his death. And this is why it's very easy for side CO to take this debate. Let's understand why Putin stays in power today. And this is one simple argument coming from us today: his social contract. Putin took over in the early 2000s from Boris Yeltsin the drunk. Right? What Boris Yeltsin did was introduce democracy and change from the Soviet Union to this sort of more modern Russian Federation. He fucked it up. And what could he do? Because post-Soviet Russia was an area ruled by the mafia whose economy was thrown to shit because of 10 years of war in Afghanistan, and he really couldn't do much. What Putin then promised to do was, by coming into power after Yeltsin, he specifically promised the people that voted him in that we were going back to these old Soviet ideals. And two of them were the most important. The first one was a strong and stable economy to ensure that nobody had to go hungry again. And the second one was the concept of a greater Russia and the Russification and the uniting of the Russian peoples, right? Putin cares about these people's support because people in Russia today aren't like what outside government believe, some sort of mindless drones just being oppressed by Putin. They genuinely actually care about him and actually support him. Sure, the elections themselves are farcical, but the actual fact that Russia, there exists a lot of jingoism and nationalism in Russia is like extremely true. Why? Because of how shit post-Soviet Russia was, right? Because Putin couldn't really do anything to make it worse. So even his small changes made something better, right? So people believed in his Putin plan. And moreover, Putin cares less about the international part of this, right? Because international posturing was already fucked after the 2014 Crimea invasion, right? Russia was already a social pariah. They had even banned stuff like fresh food imports into Russia, right? But more than that, the West can't actively dethrone him, right? The people in his own country with whom he owes this social contract obligation to, they can actively do that. So he cares about them more than the US simply saying, hey, screw you, Russia, man, you're such a. So what we then say is he placed a greater emphasis on what is the control of the traditional Soviet people. Right? His rise to power was on the back of Chechen separatists attacking Moscow. Continuous interference with domestic policies, just as side government says, of ex-Soviet states such as Georgia and in the Orange Revolution continues to show public support for Putin interfering with that Russification, right? Because what it did is gave him legitimacy when the economy failed. For example, in 2014, when there were huge sanctions levied on the Russian economy, and for which like the people literally couldn't even find fresh fruit to eat, right? He then decided to invade Crimea. And even though they made the sanctions worse, and even though it fucked up the economy even more, people still came out in droves to support Putin. And people had a new nationalistic fervor, right? Why? Because they saw him fulfilling his goal of reuniting the Russian people and making the old Soviet Union as great as it once was. So see how when he failed on this economic front, which he was able to do somewhat successfully after normalizing ties with the rest of the world since 2008, he then turned to this other front of Russification and the Russian people to distract from economic objectives. Because ultimately he does care about what people think. And this is what OO gets fundamentally wrong, because he does care about the internal oppression. He cares about it more than international oppression. Before I move on to how the fucked economy works, let's take over.
It's unfair to compare Crimea to the specific scenario simply because there's majority Russian and their economic significance. But at the same time, it's less likely when taking over Ukraine proves so difficult for you to actually get the great Russia method you guys talk about.
So yeah, I understand what you mean. I understand why it's unfair for you because it really kills your case. But if closing government relies on the fact that interference in the Orange Revolution and Georgia is part of this greater idea of Russification, then I can't see why specifically Crimea shouldn't be included, because it's more Russian than Georgia or more Russian than Ukraine. And see how even if I'm going to deal with this later, but I have a good flow. Don't. COVID fucked the economy, right? The reason why 2022 was so important is because 2020 fucked the Russian economy, right? Specifically, COVID fucked everybody, but what made it worse is more competitive sources for Russian raw materials became available elsewhere. In 2020, large lithium deposits were found in South America, and specifically in 2021, more uranium deposits were found in Canada. Uranium of specific significance because even the CIA in the Cold War had to smuggle uranium out of Russia and titanium out of Russia because they were the only places you could get these raw materials, and they were such great economic significance. So even the CIA in the Cold War was willing to fund an enemy to get these materials. But suddenly you get cheaper and better available sources of these materials elsewhere, right? So Russian economy is fundamentally fucked over, relying on raw materials. Moreover, there's a negative view of Russia after the 2016 election fiasco, which further worsened this and relit the tensions between Russia and the US, right? So the economy was unlikely to be fixed no matter what Putin did because of the simple fact that he relied on these raw materials and that these raw materials are now uncompetitive in Russia means that he can't fix the economy. So note now, when he decides to therefore invade Ukraine as a result of this economic failing, it does not mean he has to even fucking take over Ukraine. Putin did not think he was going to take over Ukraine. Why would he posture for years? Like, this is not something new. He's been doing this for like 6 years. Why did he choose 2022 specifically? Right? It's because people needed to see him fulfill his mandate. The Russian army was never good, and Putin was not under any circumstances, under any illusions, thinking that. The reason he did it is because he needed people to get stirred up in favor to support him. There was rising unrest because of economic tension and economic reasons, and in order to fulfill that social contract that he originally came to power because of, he needed to ensure that there was some reason the Russian people could be given to back up. So even if in the long run the Russian people turned against him, he needed to try and distract them from the shit economy. Because the choice for Putin was not one of, hey, will I win this war? The choice for Putin was a certain death from starved mobs coming and invading the Kremlin, or him trying to fight this farcical war for another 5 years. Because note uniquely that it's the time scale that's the problem. Because Putin wants to die a hero. How long do you really think this is going to last? Right? Putin knows the end is here, and he wants to ensure that his power is consolidated and the people love him until his last. We win because we prove that we had no other option other than face certain death at the hands of a starved mob or fight a war that we may or may not win.
Thanks, David. I speech now economic outfit. Close out the government. Yeah. Miss anything?
I'm going to start by explaining the two main clashes and why our clash is more important than the other one. Second point, where we telling you what my partner said and reminding you why this is the most important case. And lastly, we'll just briefly proving that our case trips down both opposition teams. So looking at the clashes and why that's important, there are two main clashes on the domestic impact that this war has had within Ukraine, second international impact. On the domestic impact, which we have really talked more about and did a good job on that, and both options have been talking about. The problem is that everybody has been ignoring a state throughout the debate that makes both sides symmetrical to the point where the impacts internationally are much larger. Putin controls the media and controls the narrative and spreads misinformation like any other authoritarian leader. What we have here is that we have the fact that there's much less impact in this kind of clash, because it's more difficult for to achieve a unilateral response from the people. Therefore, whether that invasion happened or not, he will still and forever control the media as an authoritarian leader. Therefore, the impacts I'm getting from both on domestic impacts are much shorter on the actual impacts that come from the outside. Not to undermine OG's statement about how he does look bad, especially in the eyes of investors and investors that have actual power within Russia, but we believe that our case on international impact is much more important. Now I'm going to remind you what my partner said looked like. Basically, he talked about NATO and the EU and how both those groups became much more strong and are now unified against Russia. Mind you, everyone has agreed in this room that NATO and EU did not like Russia beforehand. We have to go over that happened before. I'm not way too informed on every kind of different clash that countries have between them, but that's known. Okay. Therefore, now we have the countries that take part in there that are in the tipping point of, hey, Russia is a strong power, we shouldn't go against them that much. Now the tipping has shifted against them and having decided to break the confusion of who to side with, even the neutral countries, very well explained by my partner that even neutral countries have agreed to take part in potentially joining the EU. Therefore, just on this front, Russia is fucking up by Putin is losing a potential ally or neutral power that could go against them, because those countries, a lot of countries do have money and platforms throughout the economy and whatever. Second, which I believe is extremely important, was not by opposition side, because they made claims that they're not as important as the soft power that he has within the countries that are around them. Let's not forget, make USSR great again is what Putin wants the most and has wanted since the start. It has been known since 2004, it has been known since the time he started talking about going into politics. And that's why he looks like an embarrassment on one side, and at the same time, he lost he tipped the countries over on the other side. The countries are like, hey, but if we keep him on our side on religious matters, because we have the same religion, because we have similar history, because they have money, so they can help us, etc., etc. But at the same time, the embarrassment he looks like, what he looks like is making him fuck up. He explained very well how in case Ukraine wins, he still fuck ups the treaty who can still be shitty for him with the potential sanctions that come from the EU or the US, and at the same time, even if he wins, he still can get shitty repercussions. But the fact that NATO is going to be even more unified, potentially adding more members in order to feel more protected, bordering Poland with a lot more guns and ammo, and being ready for a potential next change. No. Actually, yes, before it doesn't.
The Ukrainian war and what has subsequently occurred has made NATO and Western countries look useless. And this is not exactly what Bill
No, they haven't. The reason is because, trust me, they do not we do not want to get to World War III immediately, okay? This is not what we want to happen right now. We do not have, as a NATO country, I'm going to speak from a NATO perspective, the NATO does not have the jurisdiction to fight over Ukraine. It would be shitty. That's when they would look like shit, because there's no treaty there's no way to accept the fact that Ukraine is in there, okay? Therefore, they don't look back. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do and allow. When Poland, went into Poland, they actually responded accordingly by putting more ammunition in the borders of Poland. Therefore, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. But okay, as I said, make cases are great. It does not work because, as you said, looking by OO's case. We're looking back because they're I guess like quote-unquote poor country like Ukraine, which is because they don't have as many resources, don't have as many alliances like Russia has, or as much territory as Russia has. The world still look like shit in the rest of the world. Second, about the Western influence on your case as well. Apart from you ignore completely all the money that's constantly going into Ukraine, the US have spent money like twice since the start of 2024. We ignored that. It has strengthened the unification of NATO and EU, like my partner said very well, which is still important. So, on the West having financial struggle, we need to weigh the impact. Okay? Yes, there are impacts. I strongly believe that Putin is not a bitch boy like you're trying to explain. The whole goal isn't to actually, okay, I'm gonna make the West stubble, when in fact the impacts that he's getting here are substantially on his own side when all of his enemies are doing fine against him. Trust me, even if he gets the West to struggle a little bit, being a bitch boy is not his main goal, it's to actually win something. Yes, last but not least, on outside support, his most important potential allies are fact, they're fit on the other side, it's doing very well. Now, on CO. CO, yeah, they're very proud of your economy and about how his economy and the domestic impacts have domestically his economy, it has been very well rebutted by OG. That was bad strategy, I'm sorry. But your most pertinent point about making users are great again, which was stolen by all. You said about his main motivations. His main motivations, honestly, they have been brought into, oh yes, oh my god. Well, you know, OG, due to the fact that yes, it's about the domestic impact. We still be, yeah, your case is derivative, so I can't be bothered with that. We win against OG because we believe that international impact that has had is a lot more important it's a lot more important than potential domestic impact because it's still, even without the war, he would have a huge influence within the people of the country and the people that have money within the country. Therefore, Putin is fucked. I'm sorry, guys.
Thanks, Speaker. Now I call on the main speaker to close out the That's on mine because no. Yeah.
That's the oligarch of Disney.
Volume, think the recording will pick it up.
You don't mention the mic.
Cool. I'll take a POI from both the team, just please offer them silently, or just raise your hands up probably at some point. Cool. 3, 2, 1. Crazy to call our case derivative when they ran the exact same push as opening. Sorry, the main push was international stuff, mainly contingent on NATO strengthening itself, which we got all from the Deputy Prime Minister. I'm sorry, their case is completely derivative. It's ridiculous to be throwing spells when you're in a glass house. But secondly, why is our case not derivative? Because opening opposition's entire case is about incentives about the war, right? He is making ground, so he doesn't regret it because he can make more ground, right? We actually give you the underlying incentives for why all of this is occurring, but also why he reached a flashpoint where he had to make one decision or the other. The other decision, I'm telling you, was probably certain death or exile, which is probably not very good to him. The case is completely different from opening. So cool, let's go down the benches and explain why we are winning. Okay, what does opening government give us? Opening government gives us a bunch of stuff kind of focused on the international realm without actually justifying to us why the international realm is important to begin with, right? They tell us like, you have vilifications and like a far more specific between the fight between the West and Putin. There's significantly more tension between the West and Russia, and there's no way to have as much trading and much cooperation in a way that benefits everyone. I reckon this is the rebellious blockades that CB was talking about OG provided. The reason that this doesn't apply is because the economy already got fucked. The economy was fucked, right? There is no scope for economic recovery on a high level in Putin's lifetime. Why? Because 2014 happened. Why? Because since I was a kid, Putin has been a villain on the world stage in terms of his characterization in the West, right? I grew up in Toronto, I grew up in London, I grew up in New York. In all three of those cities, Putin is seen as a villain. He's consistently be seen as such. There was no chance of him regaining his reputation with the West, regaining his reputation internationally. But they also don't play out the scenario. Sure, maybe NATO is united now. Maybe they're a threat. I kind of agree with OO that they're wasting their money and they look weak. But regardless, maybe they've consolidated power. Maybe Finland and Sweden have joined. So what? They're never going to engage in a direct war with Russia. It means nothing for Putin. But also, by the time you get to any stage that's severe, Putin's probably already fucking dead. I mean, what's the guy, like late 60s, 70s, something like that? The guy's getting old, right? Right now, his decision is to maintain and consolidate power domestically for as long as he can, but also maintain the love and the support of the Russian people, right? And that is what he's doing. He's delivering on his social contract because he can no longer deliver effectively on the economy. They have to prove likelihoods for that. When they tell us that all these economic harms happen, they have to tell us likelihood. There's no engagement with the comparative from GovBench. I'm just incredibly confused. Sure.
Speaking of comparatives, the reason why this whole thing started was because Ukraine was speaking with NATO. If the metric is the creation of Great Russia, how does the example of this long war not give hope to the countries he wishes to take over in the future, thus leading to Putin's failure on your very own metric or glass house?
Sure. Okay. So the reason that our case still works, even given that, maybe Poland or Georgia, I'm studying Eastern Europe, but whatever these countries may be, whatever he may want in terms of a full unification, of course that's not accessible. He can't invade every country and restart the Soviet Union now. You know what he can do? He can die as the man who took back Ukraine and put Russia on the front foot when it comes to consolidating the USSR. That is what his reputation will be historically grounded in, right? That's what the guy wants. He's not only an egomaniac that wants to deliver on his promises so he can be great, he also wants to deliver on his promises to the Russian people, and this is how he does it, right? It's 1 foot forward. Of course, a complete invasion to reunite the entire bloc is completely improbable in his lifetime, even if he started from day one. But this is the most likely option in terms of getting any kind of front foot and delivering on any of his promises in the little time he may have left. But also, if he continues and didn't do any military action, didn't consolidate power, didn't enact martial law, what you probably see coming up is, again, dissatisfaction amongst the Russian people who are economically starving and dying, right? They were going to come for him eventually. The only way to prevent that is to distract them with a war, but also this war delivers on the promises that he promised. This is an actor motion. It's about his incentives. These are the initial incentives he set out for himself. These are the only incentives he is able to deliver on now. The only incentives he can actually recollect and actually grab, right? That is why we're winning this debate, because we actually tell you how you can still fulfill any of his last minute incentives. OG gave us this weird stuff about how, they don't have to engage with the comparative. They don't have to talk about the other side of things because there are other options that could have been good. But insofar as you're describing his incentives, you have to describe his incentives through the current status, but also through the counterfactual and how they compare and how they are achieved. None of the teams do this. Close me.
Okay. Okay, he's losing though. You're not proving us how he's actually going to achieve what he wants. And the people in Russia still, their soldiers are still dying. They're still losing an immense amount of money. Their still economy is getting
So it would be nice if you listen to Max case. Two things, right? First, he doesn't have to win. He just has to be the guy that stepped up and fucking tried. But secondly, all he has to do is maintain this war for a period of time to the point where he's consolidated enough soft power domestically again that he can sit tight until he dies, right? That is all he has to do, and that is something that is very achievable. But also in the status quo, insofar as NATO is not going to engage in the war, and they're not going to essentially invade Russia or fight Russia directly, he has the power to do this. Insofar as OO already tells us, he's slowly making ground. He's probably going to win. They show us no escape. They give us 3 scenarios. 2 of those scenarios are just so unlikely. Of course he's not going to sit down at the table and form a bilateral agreement. And of course he's not going to lose, right? These are completely ridiculous. There's no actual characterization of any likelihood, but illustration of how scenarios play out on the government bench. Cool. No. Okay, cool. Against our opening, if my timer will turn back on. Never mind. Someone holds up for me. Thanks. Okay, cool. So here's what we have, right? From let me deal with a member of government closing government real quick. Cool. Because international perception matters more than Putin, and he managed to convince historically neutral countries to join NATO. Again, derivative of OG, who've already done this, right? They've already talked about NATO consolidating powers, international influence. But we tell you what, international realm no longer matters in this debate. Putin failed on any incentives in the international realm many, many years ago. You have to engage with who Putin was in 2022, who he is now, and whether or not he regrets that decision. Insofar as that is not leading to his death, insofar as he is still in power and he's consolidating it, Putin is delivering on the only incentives he can possibly have left. This is the best outcome for him, but it's also the only outcome for him where he doesn't die, doesn't get exiled. Mac proves this to you. For those reasons, this is the only decision he could have made. Putin cannot regret this decision. It's the best thing for his power. It's the best thing domestically. He's delivering on his promises, right? The opening government bench doesn't engage with the comparative. In the comparative, in our world, he dies. It's not good. For those reasons,
Thank all the speakers for a great debate. You can first and shake hand and leave the room for a minute. Let me take 2 minutes. I'm going to keep the morning.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Thanks.
It would be nice, but
I already. Yeah, all good. I'm sorry, what's your name again? And Francesco, yeah?
Yes.
I'm Sachin. Can you repeat your name one more time? Kieran. Okay, perfect. Let's go.
Sorry, can you hear me?
I'm Sachin.
Sashi.
Yeah. Kieran, you can go ahead.
I have CO first, or second, OG third, CG.
So CO, OO, OG, CG.
Same exactly.
Okay. So I think we need to have a conversation, especially, I think I agree with you, Gumbench. I think, for me, the way I play CO's extension is a bit different, because I feel like that contribution isn't as important as they put it out to be, because I feel like it's just a one sentence in addition to what O said, but we'll discuss it as we go. Let's start with top half. You both have OG losing to O. Why is that? You can go ahead, Kieran, first.
Cool. So I think what comes out of OG is probably two claims. Firstly, Putin's interest in the consolidation of power. Secondly, how this is going to be less by making billionaires angry because they have frozen assets, and by having a more explicit fight and less cooperation with the West, which harms the economy, less support naturally stronger, etc. I think the responses that we get from opening opposition are that, there's not really an opposition to support. There's no alternative to Putin. I buy it. Like, given average intelligent voter knows that what happened last week. And secondly, on the West is the engagement that we get from, I think, DLO on there not being significant threats, less domestic backlash as well as media control in the country. And the West focuses more on other things like Gaza. So I'm unsure what the extent of the West getting stronger against Russia is going to be. On the comparative, on OO, we have interest of expanding the sphere of influence, getting more land, Putin's winning or at least delaying the wars, and they have more resources to do so. Secondly, as well as harming the West. So they pour time and money in the war. Putin controls the media, can say, this was kind of fooey. No benefits, there's a financial drain, political chaos in other countries, etc. Benefits of this and opening opposition, you're still in power, you can spend money how you want, and it feeds into your domestic campaign of the anti-West.
Do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, just quickly about the whole anti-West, I think the only point that was good on OG was that, yes, it did make the West more powerful or united at first. But now, because it's lasted so long, it's true, they're starting to break down. There's so many impacts on the domestic politics and just living livelihoods of the people. So I think that's where they lose it, is that united, yes, at the beginning, but now it's not so much. So to some degree, that's where OO wins.
Yeah, so I think I agree with both of you. I think OO is able to mitigate majority of the domestic harms that Oji talks about and show why they are marginal. In addition, they're able to actually flip the international outcome and say that it was beneficial for Putin, as well as showing why Putin's power is based on his perception and why his perception has been improved after his invasion. Let's bring in CG. I'll tell you why I think CG is losing to OG. So CG has two contributions. One on NATO. I think to a large degree it is derivative. Even the parts which is not derivative is unclear as to why it's so additive. So they say as to why NATO is unified. They give reasons as to why NATO is important and that NATO might go and invade Russia. But it's unclear as to why this would have happened even without this invasion. So it's unclear as to why there is a unique and important extension. What I do think is completely unique is this extension about soft power in the region. I'm unclear as to why the soft power has genuinely reduced, except for assertions. Because I feel like it is just asserted that now pro-Russian parties don't exist. It is asserted that no one in these countries back Russia now. It's unclear as to why this is structurally true for most of these countries. Insofar as they're unable to prove it, I don't think they have a strong claim to weigh off anything against OG, because they've already proven some degree of domestic harm as well as some degree of international harm through perceptions. Are you all okay with that? Do you all have anything to add to that?
Yeah. No, I think it's good.
Do you nothing to add? You can go ahead. Okay, let's bring in CEO. So, Francisco, what do you think CEO's extension is?
CEO?
Yeah.
I would say the main point was, I think what was just really interesting was actually going back to the real base of who Putin is.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they didn't bring up, like, to be fair, brought up the whole point about him being very focused on USSR. I think what's really important on that point is the two promises, and that's how they rely on that whole case. And I think it is very strong, especially when it comes to the USSR and how the people are very patriotic and always will support him as long as he shows that strength and that he's basically a big, strong Russian man that never bows down to the West like they did in the past. So I do see a large strength in that. But at the same time, as you said, like, it can't take over OO because they don't talk about the international gains at all or losses at all and purely domestic. But it's true, Putin is, of course, going to be focused on the domestic, but at the same time, he's such a big figure, he's such a big name. He's going to care about the international. So that's where they lose in a sense.
What do you think?
So I think where CEO takes this debate for me is in being the first team to actually prove incentive and prove why they win the incentive clashes that we have between consolidation of power or how you look internationally. And the reason why they do so is they say, look, the Russian economy has been doing worse and worse. Western sanctions are a thing and have been a thing for a long time, even before Crimea. This means more and more people are bereft of basic necessities to live. And that is the tipping point at which you get internal backlash. Now, I'm unsure about the fucking scope of the thing, which is why the margin is very close for me between CO and OO.
I agree.
So I'm unsure, why people are going to take to the streets, why Putin is going to be exiled and not. But I think it's never engaged with. And one of the important things in this context is that there's analysis. It stands to a degree. We know of the sanctions, and Russian economy was fucked to a certain degree. Now we know, look, Putin's social contract that he promised is going back to Soviet roots. And if this is the only thing that he can reasonably fulfill to prove his domestic power, domestic leadership, then I'm willing to buy that is his main interest and that he fulfilled the interest.
Okay, so my question is this then. So then so I think OO already talks about why Putin strengthened Russia, right?
Yeah.
Because their argument is that by weakening the West, you strengthen Russia.
Okay.
So then the mechanism that CEO gives is you distract people, right? That is a specific mechanism, right? You distract people by going to war. So my question is, why is that mechanism so much stronger than OO's mechanism that already exists? Because it's the same thing, right? You distract people to consolidate your power. You make the West weak and make Russia look strong to consolidate your power. So is it so meaningfully different or stronger to make them beat OO? Because they get to the same endpoint, right? They just consolidate power and make sure he doesn't get killed. Like, and his domestic base is happy. What do you all think?
I think the way in which it is stronger and why I thought it was stronger is because of the analysis, like the even if layer that we get. Look, it doesn't matter what the outcome of this war is, which is still uncertain. He does not need to win if he just wants to show that he expands like pro-Russian, greater Russian interest. On the comparative, like it is still harder and I mean less proven, but still stands from opening opposition that he's still gaining ground and probably winning.
So, but isn't what you just said also contingent on the outcome though? So if it's about showing that Russia is more powerful than the West, it's contingent on weakening the West to some extent,
It's
right?
not about it being more powerful. It's about him fulfilling his obligation of showing that he cares for
So
Russia.
it just invading is in itself an outcome. So what you're trying to say?
Yes, and I think they proved that for me to a sufficient.
That's I think reasonable. All I'm trying to think of is
We think that this room, the live stream might still be on.